Thank you for turning to page 121. Today we're going to take a look at multi-classing. This is going to come out of the Player's Handbook. Multi-classing, what's that? Well, it's something demi-humans get to do, where you can follow more than one character class in AD&D. So if you want to be a fighter thief, that's how you do it. I'm going to go take a look at the various races that can do it and the pros and cons of doing it. I also want to remind everybody I'm still doing a subscription drive. If you haven't subscribed yet, come on in. We talk about games here a lot. And for those of you who have, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Also, still looking for ideas for a Patreon reward that some folks might want. I may start doing some videos and just putting them up on Patreon and see if that gets any interest. I don't know. I haven't decided yet. Please let me know some feedback of stuff you would like to see that might be of interest to you. But today we're going to take a look at multi-classing from the Player's Handbook in AD&D. Multi-classed characters, a time-honored tradition in AD&D, and one that's been alive at my table since as long as I've had the Player's Handbook. This is something we embraced early. It's part of the core rules, and it's something I've always felt fit the game beautifully. I have no issue if somebody wants to play a multi-class character at my table. However, multi-classing can lead to power gaming. That gets a little tiresome if you every time a player plays a new character, it's got to be a multi-class, especially if it's a triple class. Now suddenly you have these ridiculous combinations wandering around, and he's the only one that needs to be in the party, really. Multi-class has its pros and cons. And we're going to take a look at those. First, we're going to see where the rules are in Player's Handbook. Multi-class starts getting talked about as you're reading about character races. Under the character race descriptions, it goes into what careers the characters can have. The character of the Dwarven race can be a fighter, a thief, or an assassin. It's also possible for the Dwarven character to opt to work simultaneously as a fighter and thief class. So there's the first mention of multi-classing right there. And I'm not going to go through each and every one of these because there's a better look at it on page 32 to 33 of the Player's Handbook called The Multi-Classed Character. This is a nice overview, and for today's video, I'm only going to discuss the multi-classes available to characters from the AD&D Player's Handbook. Unearthed Arcana gave us others, and of course there were Dragon articles that did. But I just want to get the concept of the multi-class character presented today, and then maybe in a future video I'll take a look at those. And the other ones that were brought out in Unearthed Arcana. So for today's discussion, multi-class character assumes that only non- or semi-human, I love that semi-human characters, can be multi-class. Only class combinations are possible. Only certain class combinations are possible depending on the race of the character. Although these are listed in the section dealing with each race, multi-class character possibilities are also shown below. And cleric combinations with fighter types may use edged weapons. That was the first kind of break that we found where the restriction against clerics using blunt weapons was kind of brought forward. And was another argument to say, well, clerics can use edged weapons, which of course we adopted. If you saw my video on the cleric, then you know that's something we adopted early at my table. So we're going to take a look first at, we're going to go down through each of the classes, the mixes, and who can be them, what race that can be them, and then we're going to take a look at some of the pros and cons of being a multi-class character. So first off, a cleric fighter, strong in defense and revitalization, so you can dish it out, and you can help everybody else take it. Hit points will be good. Half-elves and half-orcs may be cleric fighters. Fighter, cleric, magic user. We saw quite a few of these in the early days of D&D. This is an interesting one. One of the best of the multi-class options. This gives good offensive and defensive spell capability, plus the fighter's melee combat strength. Half-elves may be cleric, fighter, magic users. There are pros and cons to being cleric, fighter, MU. Cleric Ranger. The combination is potent in outdoor situations, and half-elves may be Cleric Rangers. Cleric Rangers is one of my favorites, and I'll explain my rationale for that when I take a look at each one. Cleric Magic User. Combination gives the character a great variety of selection of spells, as well as more weapons, but you are limited to armor. Half-elves may be Cleric Magic Users. Cleric Thief. Same thing, you get the better defensive and stealth potential, but you are limited in what armor you can wear, and only half-orcs may be Cleric Thieves. Cleric Assassin. Seemingly strange, this combination is quite understandable when you see which race can do it. Great combat capability plus sneaking. Half orcs, maybe cleric assassins. Fighter magic user. Obviously, this combination allows excellent armor strength, the use of weaponry, and spells. Hit points are good. On average, elves and half-elves may be fighter magic users. Fighter illusionists. They refer to the fighter magic user above, and gnomes may be fighter illusionists. We had a prominent fighter illusionist in our game called Nick. I'll talk about him in just a moment. Fighter thief. This is actually pretty common at our table. So for somebody to combine, it's a fighter thief. Dwarves, elves, gnomes, half-elves, halflings, and half-orcs may be fighter thieves. Fighter assassin. Only half-orcs may be fighter assassins. Fighter magic user thief. This is an interesting one. It's one I've seen once or twice, but not a ton. You get a great mix. You get the fighting capability, the magic use, and then, of course, the thieving skills. Magic user thief. That's the only combination that I had of a character who did well as a multi-class. You had a magic user thief named Flynn that I ran for years. He did quite well. And then Illusionist Thief, for Magic User Thief, only elves and half-elves may be Magic User Thieves. And Illusionist Thief, gnomes may be Illusionist Thieves. So there's a lot of choices to make, but there's some pros and cons to it. So I'm going to go into that a little bit. First off, you get half a hit die per level you go up per class. So in other words, if I am starting at first level as a fighter thief, I would start with a 10 and a 6. If I was just a fighter, I would start with 10 hit points at my table. If I was just a thief, I'd start 6 points at my table. Well, let me zoom in a little bit on the dice so we can read them better. Well, as you have two classes, you have to split those. You don't get the benefit of both full dice. You get half the version. So at my table, starting with maximum hit points, you would start with 5 for the fighter and 3 for the thief, for a total of 8. So right there, you see a little bit of down check of your hit points as opposed to just being a pure fighter. And that can be one of the things that does detract from being a multi-class character, is the hit points can suffer a little bit. One of the worst you're going to encounter, in my opinion, is if you're a fighter magic user, because now you're starting with 4 hit points would be max for a magic user, and 10 hit points for a fighter. But now again, we're cutting to half. So my 4 becomes a 2. See if we can read that a little bit better. Up there. Now, my half becomes a 2, and this becomes a 5. So my starting hit points are only 7, because I'm taking a half die for each one. So there's a definite downside in that regard. And you have to be careful. I mentioned earlier that, in my opinion, the fighter or the Ranger Cleric is a really good choice. And that's simply because both classes of Ranger and Cleric use 8-siders. So a Ranger Cleric is a good choice because you don't suffer any degradation of your hit points because you're using 8-siders straight across. Arguably, the only place you're losing it is at brand new first level. When you have to, at our table, you get the first 8-sider for full at 8, and then you have to throw the second one. Whatever comes up is what the value is. So in that case, if he threw an 8, he would get 8 plus the 8 would be 16, cut in half would be 8, and then he would have the other 8 cut in half to 4, so he would get 12. So there are pros and cons to this, but that's the one class where the hit points really aren't an issue. I mentioned earlier that I had a successful character named Flynn, and good old Flynn was a thief MU. Flynn was a lot of fun. He was a thief MU. It was something I tried. We were based out of Greyhawk City, and it was a lot of fun for me. He was a very interesting character. I played him fast and loose. Flynn, of course, he's named for Errol Flynn, the fine old Hollywood actor and star of The Adventures of Robin Hood, one of my favorite films. And Flynn, unfortunately, had the misfortune early in his career, at around 4th level of both classes, of encountering a slicer beetle that took off his right arm. Flynn paid a lot of money to get that arm regrown, but he earned the nickname Lefty. And that nickname stayed with my character for the rest of the time I played him. So he became more known as Lefty at my table than as Flynn. But one of the interesting things I would do with Flynn, Lefty, was I would break into a place. I would actually went out of my way, since we were in an urban setting, I went out of my way to become a burglar, a second story man, second story elf. I was a pure elf. And once I'd get into the place and I'd get the item that I was after, I would simply teleport out once I was of high enough level. And failing that, I would dimension door. I'd look out the window and I'd dimension door to the roof across the street. Made quick getaways very simple for the character. And it was one of the aspects of the character I loved. When he got to be higher level, Flynn topped out, I think, around about 9th or 10th level magic user, and I think I was about 11th level thief. I would have to check the numbers on that, but I was fairly high, and I got a polymorph self, and that just made burglaring so much simpler. You can burgle very easily when you can just change your shape and fly into a place or climb up a wall or go in as a bug. He was a lot of fun. I have a lot of fond memories of Flynn. Maybe one of these days I'll take him out again and play him. I don't play that often anymore as a player. I'm almost always a DM, but maybe one of these days I'll ask one of the other guys to run the game and I can play him again. So there's an example of somebody that was successful at our table, and that was my character, Flynn. Another character that was successful was our illusionist, our gnome fighter illusionist, Nick. That was played by a friend of mine. And Nick was a fun gnome illusionist because he really embraced the whole gnome prankster aspect of it. And being a fighter illusionist, Nick could also back it up because he could use illusions to create the prank. And if somebody got upset with him about it, he was a fighter also. And he had the fortune of early in his career, probably around 6th level, not me, another DM granted him a Vorpal sword, a short sword. Nick became much feared at our table and was always a very good-natured sport about it. He still continued to play his pranks and everything, but he didn't suffer a lot of retribution because of that. So now I just want to address one other aspect of multi-class that was a little confusing for us at our table. And for that, I'm going to talk about a fighter magic user. I'm going to go with a fighter thief. So a fighter, I'd go up to, say, third level fighter, third level thief. And I did it in the same night, and they both go up. And I have an 18 constitution for this conversation. So I throw my dice. I have a 3 and a 1. I have to cut that in half so it becomes 3 points. So I gain 3 points for my next level. Plus my constitution bonus of 18 is a plus 4. So I would gain a total of 7 points. Okay, pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Not a great roll, but pretty straightforward. Now, I continue on and I go to 4th level in Thief, but I'm still not quite there in Fighter. At the end of the night, and when experience points are awarded and everything, everybody tallies up their stuff, and I find that this Fighter Thief has gone to 4th level Thief. The way we do it is he throws his 6-sider, and only the 6-sider, takes his 3, cuts it in half, 1.5, rounds up to 2. He gets 2 points. And then he front loads the 4 points for the 18 Constitution. And you're saying, well, wait a minute. He's not a fighter. He's going up as a thief. How can he do this? Well, this has its origins in early D&D. We had a couple of people at the table who would kind of try to job the system a little bit and say, well, I didn't take my Constitution bonus at all when I went up in my thief level. So I have to take it now when I'm at my fighter level, when in fact they did take it early on. So we had to establish a rule. When were you going to be able to take that Constitution bonus? So we decided the easiest way to do it was the character would take it whenever he went up a level. So if he went up, in this case, in the thief level, he would take the plus 4 for the fighter bonus, even though the thief doesn't get that. That way we always knew that it was front-loaded and he'd already taken it. And it further became a default rule at our table, is that you could never ever question whether you had taken it or not, because it was assumed you did. And if you didn't, too bad for you. You should have paid more attention. You should have taken it when you had the opportunity. Of course, we're not hard and fast in that rule. And those days of having to have rules like that have kind of retired. We're all mature gamers now, and we all play a pretty honest game. But we did have to have that rule around for a very long time, because we had some power gamers at our table that were always trying to get a little edge. And if it meant that they got their Constitution bonus twice, once when they went up as a thief, and again when they went up as a fighter, they would jump on it. They would take it. So that's the way we do it. We front load the Constitution bonus, whatever it is, right there, and that way we know that whenever he goes up, he's already front-loaded the Constitution bonus. So that's really it. One other thing I want to discuss, I've already said that fighter clerics can use edged weapons. We also they have the restriction here for magic user, fighter magic user, and the fighter magic user can use metal armor because he's an elf or half elf. That's fine. We've always allowed that. I have no problem with that. We don't restrict thieves when you have a fighter thief. Thieves, in theory, can only wear leather armor. The exception to this we made is if the thief has elfin chain, that's non-magical chain, but of elfin make, which is base armor class 4, and very silent, very supple, very quiet. Think Bilbo's mithril shirt that he gives to Frodo in Lord of the Rings. That's elfin chain. I know that's magical, but that's dwarven make, I know, but I'm giving an example. So the idea was that then he could wear his chainmail and still perform all his thief activities. We'll also allow it if he has magical chainmail. For our game, magical chainmail is actually very quiet. It doesn't clank or clink and things like that. So we allow a fighter thief who has magical chainmail to just wear the chainmail all the time and then do his thief functions. We had a lot of stuff where people were changing out of armor and we had a delay going into a big monster fight because so-and-so had to put on his armor and stuff. And that got tiresome, and there's no real reason for it other than the rules said so. And one of the first rules is if you don't like a rule, change it. So we did. I neglected one thing, experience point splitting. When you get experience points at the end of the night, it's been a particularly good adventure and everybody's getting awarded, and just for purpose of this conversation, you're awarded 1,000 experience points. The 1,000 experience points are split in half, 500 to this class, 500 to that class. We do not limit character classes by race. In other words, you can continue to go up as a thief or MU, illusionist, half-orc, cleric, as high as your experience points will take you. So you're not splitting. When a half-orc cleric fighter hits 4th level in cleric, he can't go any higher, but he has to continue to split the experience points. So he will now progress half as fast as everybody else, but gain no additional power. That never made sense to me, and I realized that was a rule balance thing to make the game more human-centric, and I never agreed with it. So we took out the level limits based on race very early. So you always split them, but you split them and you always continue to gain, because in our game you continue to go up the levels. So that was the last part of that I had to discuss. Now I'll do the close. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate it. If you haven't subscribed, please do. Tell your friends. Have them subscribe. That's it for today. I'll see you next time on page 121.